This
ignition
conference will now be recorded.
and modes of combustion. It's like the White House chiming in.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. So, understanding the physical science of fire can help firefighters' safety. So, heat production and chemical reaction between fuel and the oxidizer. So, knowing is how you can translate into practical knowledge of fire behavior. So, you got to recognize what's happening and be able to predict what is it's going to happen, and more importantly, your actions or lack thereof of what's going to happen with the fire behavior. So two types of changes: the physical change, so the substance chemically is the same, changes the shape and size and appearance. The reaction is the actual substance changes, so from one matter to another. So all y'all, if you're making note cards for your test or some is to make sure you know the definitions of the difference of those, because those are the kind of things that'll throw you off on the written test: physical change, chemical reaction, and also chemical change. So definition of heat: increase in temperature of a substance. All right. So work occurs when force is applied to an object over distance. Okay. The substance undergoes chemical, biological, and physical change. And that'll make more sense as we go along. So two forms of energy you should know about: potential. So if you see on the left there, the holiday Christmas tree, some actually probably still have up all over the place, is your potential energy. And the one on the right that is actively on fire is your kinetic. So many types of energy. So chemical, thermal, mechanical, electrical, light, nuclear, and sound. So, but for fire behavior, potential chemical energy is what's converted to thermal and is released as heat. So measurements, so it's measured in the standard is joules, and then the international or British thermal units, BTUs. Okay. Chemical, physical changes involve exchange of energy. So potential energy is released during combustion and converted into kinetic energy. So the two types of reactions you should really remember to understand, and also for your written test, is the exothermic is the energy given off. So just, I always think of it as exiting is releasing, leaving. And then the endothermic is so converting water to steam, but it's the absorption of the heat and changing it into the steam. So process of ignition, fuel heated, temperature increases. Pretty straightforward. This causes pyrolysis. So next time you ever have a campfire or doing a bonfire or the such, take a good look down close if you can safely and look at the layer. The fuel that you think is burning is not really burning. So the wood is not really burning. It's the temperature is hot enough to change that into a gaseous state, pyrolysis, and then, which is the vaporization, and then is what burns. So again, causes pyrolysis, solid fuels, and then vaporization, liquid fuels. So it releases ignitable vapors or gases, and that's actually what burns. So the energy necessary for ignition, so is usually provided by an external source. Fuel can be heated until it ignites. Okay, so we'll go over that with the lower flammability range. Continuous production, ignition, so combustion reaction is sustained. So pilot ignition on your left, match versus auto ignition. So the boiled linseed oil soaked rag on the right is self-heating, and it's going to heat itself possibly until it auto ignites. Fuel and combustion require similar conditions to occur. So combustion, chemical reaction can occur without fire. So you got flaming combustion. You can see the flames off the briquettes as non-flaming combustion. Fire triangle is the oldest and simplest. Oxygen, fuel, and heat are needed. You take any one of those parts out and your fire goes out. You take away the oxygen, your fire is going to go out. You take away the heat, you add water to it, put wet stuff on the red stuff, fire is going to go out. You remove the fuel, fire is going to go out. And then we have the fire tetrahedron. Okay, it kind of has a lot of the same things: the oxidizing agent, the oxygen, reducing agent, your fuel, and then your heat source. All those together in a chemical chain reaction is what occurs. But again, you remove any one of those out of that tetrahedron or the triangle, whichever one you're using, and your fire goes bye-bye until you add something back to it. So just for instance, for like fuel spill fires, you roll on, and I know this will come later on, but you get your foam blanket over it, and some nice person walks through that foam blanket and breaks that bond, you're adding your oxygen and possibly your heat back to it, and then you have reignition. Several materials that affect both ignition and development. So again, fuel, heat, oxygen, and then your passive agents. So back to the two types of combustion, the non-flaming. The non-flaming burning is localized or near the fuels of the surface. And then flaming gases, fuels mixed with oxygen at the correct ratio. The heat and then the ignition temperature. So the products of combustion generate as fuel burns and changes chemical composition. You got thermal energy, toxic smoke, and smoke. And continuing on with carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, and carbon dioxide. Very important as to why we monitor our air at all times, even for overhaul. It's very important, so we can be subjected to all these, even when the fire's out and we're digging through stuff. So smoke is fuel and is always potentially flammable. This is correct. I mean, smoke is unburned gases, and they all have the potential to, as you learn later about smoke explosions and reading smoke, and we'll see later with rollover, flashovers, and such. And again, wear full PPE and SCBA anytime you work in smoke. Your flame. So products of combustion generated as fuel burns and changes the chemical composition, which is your flame. Let's get that review question. So learning objective 2. Does anybody have any questions on the first objective? Alrighty. So describe the impact of thermal energy on heat, temperature, and heat transfer. So thermal energy, heat, is energy element in both fire models. So kinetic transfers from high temperature to low temperature substance. Thermal kinetic needed to release potential chemical energy and fuel. And so it vibrates molecules, fuel loading to break down, and it releases the vapors. So as the temperature increases, those molecules continue to vibrate and break down and releasing those vapors. So understanding the relationship between heat and temperature. Okay, so we all know that water boils at roughly 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, just a food for thought. If this is over your head, but your alveoli in your lungs, they will start to liquefy at about 180 degrees. Okay, and just think about that as we move along in this presentation, and especially when we start watching the videos later on. Okay. So several sources of thermal energy to recognize: your chemical, your electrical, and your mechanical. So understanding the concept of heat transfer will help in several ways. So understand the transfer from initial fuel package to others, estimate the size of fire before attacking, evaluate the effectiveness of attack. So transfer occurs from warm to cooler, same temperature cannot transfer. So as we go through this, as we think about ventilation and your tactics and everything, really take in consideration that, so areas of high pressure want to move to areas of low pressure very rapidly. Same with heat. Heat's going to want to move from warm to cool very rapidly. The concept of transfer rate is influenced by several factors. So temperature differential, thermal conductivity, greater temperature difference, the greater the transfer rate. So if you have, I mean, obviously in the wintertime, you have a house heated to, call it 72 degrees, and it's -20 out, you feel that, you see that change, that, it's you feel cold, but you feel the cold isn't coming in rapidly. Your heat of your home is releasing rapidly. So that's what's happening there. The greater the greater the transfer rate has to do with the greater the temperature difference. If that makes sense. Conduction is heat transfer of heat through and between solids. So when we, have you done forcible entry yet? Okay, so you talked about checking the door for heat and such. Well, that was part of your reason. So convection is the transfer of thermal energy by circulation or movement of fluid. So when they say fluid, it's liquid or gas state. And then radiation is a transmission of energy as an electromagnetic wave without an intervening medium. Okay. Any questions on objective 2 so far?
So I guess just real quick with convection, would that kind of be the idea of like a wildfire that's starting, where obviously the sun's kind of been beating on the dry shrub all day, which is heating that up. But then if you get high winds, does that kind of work as far as convection goes?
Sorry, can you restate that?
Yeah, so like, I guess would that be the idea of like a wildfire kind of starting by itself would be convection, just because the heat from the sun obviously beating and making the ground hot and the shrub hot and everything like that. But then you get the high wind, which is kind of working, I guess is that kind of convection there with the high heat that's making it that much hotter?
That's a good question. Captain Johnson, can you?
Yeah. So the conditions that you're describing dry out the fuel. That convective heat will remove the moisture from the fuel and make it more of an ignition hazard and more of a fuel hazard. In this slide, they're kind of just talking about the active burn of fire and the three different methods that it transfers the energy. But you're on the right course of it's drying things out. It's convective energy. It's the movement of, like you said, the wind and the heat. But in that instance, it's more drying out the fuel than it is more, fire behavior concept. Does that answer your question? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, objective 3 is to recognize the physical states of fuel. So fuel is the material or substance oxidized or burning in combustion. So it's either inorganic or organic. So inorganic, for test question wise, obviously does not contain a carbon compound. And then obviously organic does. So the chemical content of fuel influences the heat of combustion and heat release rate. So the total amount of thermal energy released in specific amount of oxidized or fuel oxidized or burned. So heat release rates, they're measured in watts, kilowatts, or megawatts, depending on the size of the fuel and the amount of it. Gaseous fuel can be the most dangerous of all types. So vapor density, right? So if anybody's familiar with chemistry and your, if your acids and bases, it's kind of the same. You got your air, which is at 1, and then you got gases that are either they're rated at a weight. So if it's less than 1, then it's going to rise. And here they got methane. It's 1. And if it's greater than 1, it's going to sink. And then as far as liquid, so another good thing is to remember that, and always use the vapor density. It's a gas, vapor. Now when you're talking about liquids, you're talking about specific gravity. So for the same concept, water is at 1 or 1.0. Gasoline is less than 1.0, so it's going to float above the water. Where they're using salt water here is greater than 1, so it's going to sink. Both of these will come full around when you do hazmat as well. Okay, talking about if you have a liquid chemical spill in a waterway, how are you going to dam it? Are you going to dam on top of the water because it's floating on top of the water, or is it down towards the bottom of the creek or the lake where it's spilled into, where it would be greater than 1, it's going to sink? So it talks about has mass and volume, but it has no shape. Will not expand to fill all a container, and will flow downhill. Can easily pool in areas. It's so from whatever dense, or excuse me, whatever specific gravity rate it has. Vaporization, transformation of liquid to a vapor or a gaseous state. No, flammable liquids with a high vapor pressure present are a special hazard. So this is when we talk about flashpoints. Solubility factor. Okay, that's one thing. Is it water soluble? Can it mix with water? Does it not mix with water? Is it reactive with water? So if it's mixable, you can mix any proportion. Hydrocarbons, you don't want to mix, and then polar solvents, they readily mix. Density is also a factor and regarding liquid fuels. So again, liquid's less dense than water, more difficult to extinguish because it's under the water or your liquid. Fuel will not mix with water, as it says there. Adding may disperse burning liquid. So if just take a kitchen grease fire, for instance, if you pour water on it, it's going to react because it's not soluble and it wants to splatter everywhere. So we're talking about spreading that fuel even further and probably the fire as well. All right, so properties of solid fuel influence the process of pyrolysis. So if you see on your graph there, the surface to mass ratio, okay? So what it's showing here is the lower the surface to mass, the higher the energy is required for ignition. And if you go down towards the bottom, has a high surface to mass ratio, meaning there's more surface to the amount of mass there is, the lower energy is required for ignition. So just thinking about taking a box of matches to the sanding dust to try to get it to ignite as opposed to this log up here. I don't know about anybody else, but I am horrible at starting campfires. Yes, I use lots of sawdust. Then also what factors is the position. Horizontal, the spread is going to be a lot slower. Doesn't matter what surface to mass ratio you're working with. Where vertical, because heat rises and it's going to want to spread a lot faster. I think when we're talking about surface to mass ratio, what brings to mind is the worst fire, and I don't mean like bad, but one that I would never want to do again was a fire in a hopper at a location in Clear Creek that creates pellets for pellet stoves. That was the biggest pain because stuff was meant to burn, and the surface to mass ratio is so high. Whereas a log, you've got a burning log, you can usually just, if the flames are too tall, you can kick it out and scrape it, and then you're done. Or overhaul with that pellet hopper was, yeah.
I had an overhaul on a semi truck that had tomatoes in it, and you would think that tomatoes wouldn't burn, but obviously got hot enough that you're converting sugar, and we had to bring a forklift in and rip the pallets apart on the truck just to get the deep-seated fire taken away. So that was learning experience on one of the worst fires to overhaul.
Any questions on objective 4? All right. Or excuse me, objective 3. Objective 4, explain the relationship between oxygen and life safety. Okay. So oxygen is the primary oxidizing agent. It's pretty interesting statement, pretty straightforward. We're at 21% oxygen is typical. At normal temperatures, materials can ignite, burn as low as 14%. So that's where, so as low as 14%. So that's your lower flammability limit. Think about that. If it goes down to 12 or 13%, you're too lean. Okay, think about it as you're either too rich in fuel or too lean. So limited oxygen diminishes flaming combustion. Well, it's pretty self-explanatory statement. Ambient temperature impacts, so non-flaming and flaming. So as we know, the temperature really can take effect on how your fire behavior is. A really good example actually is the dollhouse, burning the dollhouses. In the wintertime, they're hard to get going and keep going because just the temperature. This temperature, as we get warmer, they'll do a lot better. Let's see. It says higher oxygen considerations than normal. Well, that's your, upper flammable limit. So you don't want to be too rich. So combustion occurs after fuel has been converted to a gaseous state and mixed with an oxidizer in proper ratio. So again, you're talking about your too rich line or your too lean. And when it talks about, it says here combustion occurs after fuel has been converted to a gaseous state. That's your vaporization or your pyrolysis. We'll be able to answer that question a lot better here and later on. So objective 5, identify the products of self-sustained chemical reactions. So self-sustained chemical reactions create several products. So combustion of methane and oxygen. So the production of carbon dioxide, CO2. Release of energy in the form of heat and light. Our main concern is the heat. We're not worried about the light that it gives off. Production of CO, carbon monoxide, and formaldehyde. And then all different types of free radicals. Flaming combustion, so again, they produce free radicals. Will burn until fuel or oxygen is exhausted. Chemical flame inhibition occurs when extinguishing agent is applied. So you put water on it, you cool it, or you put foam on it, you deplete the oxygen. You take away part of that tetrahedron or triangle, and your flame goes away till someone disrupts it. All right, I'm not. So explain the factors that affect fire development. And also learn objective, describe the stages of fire development. Is this gonna work for me? So the stages of fire development occur in both unconfined and confined fires. some reason the slide wasn't wanting to work for me earlier. But we'll see more about this in the videos later on. Several factors that will affect fire development. So the fuel type. So it affects the heat release rate. So class A, your common combustibles, or your class B, right? Fires involving single type of fuel are rare. Right? Compartment fires, a result of a gas leak. Those are your types of fuel types, that's what it's saying. Availability, location of additional fuel. So building configuration. Have you done building construction yet? Okay. Construction materials. Its contents. So meaning what people have hoarded and stacked in their homes. And then proximity of initial fire to exposed fuel sources. Okay, so radiation and convection are going to take a little bit longer, but some conduction will be quicker. Compartment volume and ceiling height, so large versus small. So large room versus small room. Large room is going to take quite a bit more to preheat and hit flash. Says high ceiling can make determining extent difficult. Ventilation. All buildings exchange air from inside to outside. Says influences can be increased or assisted. Two forms of compartment fires, changes and decrease and increase release rates. The thermal properties of compartment. So your insulation takes a big factor into it. Heat reflectivity and then retention. Your ambient conditions, high humidity, cold temperatures, strong winds. If a window fails, door opens, or a windward side, or on windward side. So as we'll see later, how we can affect fire behavior in a positive and a negative manner. When I started in the fire service, it was 1998. I was a junior in high school. It was that, yeah, carry golf balls in the pockets of your bunkers and you're going to go around breaking out all windows. Well, we've learned that's a big no-no. And it's still practiced, and it's still that philosophy is not educated enough out there. My cousin just got a couple of years ago got in trouble. He's a captain for San Diego City Fire. He showed up on scene and had law enforcement throwing lawn chairs through all the windows because that's what they've seen. That's what they used to do. And he put his hand on his shoulder of a law enforcement and said, "Please stop." And he actually got cuffed for assault. But that's a whole different story. But yeah. Fuel load. So this is something like we were talking about earlier. What is the content in there? You know, is someone hoarding magazines? Is someone foaming or hoarding foam bats? Are they stacked couches? Who knows? So on scene, you only estimate, you know, unless you know the structure, and that's what's good about, especially with commercial buildings when we do pre-plans and fire inspections, is you know what's in there. Well, to a degree, we do our best. So again, knowledge of the building construction, occupancy, and types is very essential. And it could very well change. You go do a fire inspection or a pre-plan and you see what's in there, and then a week later that's completely different. It could be 55-gallon drums of water, and then next week it's full of pallets. but we can't go in there all the time. But at least we get a chance. So incipient stage starts when the elements of the fire triangle, become together and the combustion begins. So incipient is, the real beginning stages of the fire. Your growth stage, transition and influenced by air in the compartment. So talk back to the compartment and is influenced by air. So something that's really moved forward, if anybody else is caught on, is we have a closed door policy in our home, and that has to do with fire behavior, as we'll see later. Thermal layering can also occur during the growth stage. Yes, that's true. No, this is hot smoke increases smoke volume, can cause neutral plane to descend. So that neutral plane, that smoke starts to bank down, and the heat starts to get closer to the floor. So isolated flames and rapid transitions may also be part of the growth stage. The fully developed stage occurs when all combustible materials are burning. And then the decay stage is brings combustion to a complete stop through two means. So again, what are the stages of fire? There's an incipient, growth, fully developed, and then decay. Objective 8, recognize signs, causes, and effects of rapid fire development.
I have a question about learning objective 7.
Okay.
Why do you have a closed door policy at home? Is that because you don't like your kids?
I love my kids. No, we have a closed door policy because, as we'll see later on in the videos, having it reduces the flow path of the fire. What it is
Okay.
if you have a room and contents on fire, if you have that door closed, and especially if you have a window closed too, it helps. But it'll help keep, or at least slow, the spread of that fire throughout the rest of the structure. So for instance, if I have
Hang on. Another benefit is it also muffles their crying.
I like it.
For instance, if you have a 4x4 window in a bedroom and that room catches fire, and then you have another window down the hallway in a bedroom open, depending on the wind, but it'll still want to move. Remember, heat wants to move from hot to cold. So the heat's going to want to move from that room and content out into the hallway to the cooler area. So basically you're pushing fire from burn into unburned.
So, and the other thing is so closed door policy, and I was trying to figure out how best to send some links. I'll play around with it. I can't grab the picture and put it in the chat box, but basically if you go to sleep at night and there is a fire in your house, having the door closed will insulate you from that fire and give you a better chance to get out your window or go out a different way, of the house. And it can be a difference of 1,000 degrees in the hallway and 100 degrees in your bedroom. So dramatic pictures and some experiments that they've run, and I'll find you guys some pictures to just show that if you haven't seen that kind of public safety announcement or public service announcement type posts that they've had on Facebook and other social media, just saying at night, your kids, you know, they're obviously, you know, you want to protect them. So keep their door closed at night so that they have a better survival rate than if you were to leave the door open and there's a fire. So I think that's what Josh was getting at, that he doesn't like his kids. All right, on to objective A. Thank you.
All right, so recognize signs, causes, and effects of rapid fire development. Really quick, Captain, closeyourdoor.org. Check that out, please.
Okay.
Okay. Rapid fire development is responsible for numerous deaths and injuries. So protect yourself and your crew. So really the way it is our safety is priority. Okay, we can't help others if we can't help ourselves, and we don't need to be having others help us. So the key factors is to recognize indicators, know conditions created by, determine best action to take before. So it's all really good. Most important part of the size up. Okay, where is the fire at, and where is it going, or where can it go? Where do we not want it to go? Flashover occurs when combustible materials in a compartment ignite almost simultaneously. So it typically occurs during the growth stage, but also may occur during fully developed stage. The environment of the room changes from 2-layer condition to a single well mixed. So meaning that thermal layer is no more. The temperature at the ceiling is the same as the temperature at the floor, and at all 4 walls. So transition between flashover and post flashover can occur rapidly. So conditions during, volume of the fire can increase to fill the entire room. Burning gases push out of openings. So again, when it says burning gases push out of openings, that is both hot moving to cold rapidly, and I didn't say cold, but cooler, and also high pressure to low pressure. Several common elements in flashover to be aware of. So the ignition of exposed surfaces, transition and fire development, the rapidity, so how rapidly, and then the size of the compartment. Size of the compartment takes a huge role in it. Because obviously, you know, one of these mattresses catches fire in one of these shift bedrooms here at Station 5, that's going to flash really fast, as opposed to, if at all, one of those mattresses catches fire and it's by its lonesome in something the size of the engine bay. So progression to a flashover is determined by 2 factors. So it has to have sufficient fuel and a sufficient heat release rate. Because if it doesn't have enough fuel and a high enough release rate to heat that room, then it's not going to happen. So again, example is a mattress on fire inside, you know, a 4,000 square foot building that's open with no other fuels in it, compared to a half a square foot or 10 square foot bedroom at Station 5. Ventilation, so also must have sufficient oxygen. Okay. So firefighters should be aware of several flashover indicators. Rollover, not to be confused with flashover. Okay. Rollover is more as the Fingers of fuel or fuel rolling in the smoke over your head. Building, the smoke, the airflow is very important. Amount of heat, and if there is a flame. So backdraft, not to be confused with flashover, is a change in ventilation that results in explosively rapid combustion of flammable gases. So you can see kind of, I mean, rollover, you have a little bit of coming over the firefighter's head, coming out the door there. Now the room is splashed next to him, obviously. So should know about several factors, indicators. Building, the smoke, what is the smoke doing? All right, is it wanting to, so the common is it breathing? So when they say is the smoke breathing, is it being sucked back in to the structure and then coming out in little puffs? So the effects vary depending on several factors. They don't always occur immediately after it's open. So, you don't always have like someone opens the door and boom. It depending on the seat of that fire, meaning where it's or where it's located, it may take a little bit for it to get the oxygen that it's looking for to ignite. Volume of the smoke, degree of confinement, okay, the pressure, the speed in which the fuel and air are mixed, and then also again location of where the ignition occurs. So not always occur immediately. So if mix of hot flammable products air is slow, it's unlikely to occur. May not occur until fully introduced. Violence depends on, so the extent of confinement. So the more confined the fire is, the more volatile it can be. Just think of it like in a firearm, a chambered round. So again, there says more confined, more violent. Smoke explosion. So different between a backdraft and a flashover. May occur before or after the decay stage as unburned fuel gases contact an ignition source. So cooling smoke can accumulate in other areas with mixed air. So remember, smoke is a fuel. Violent because it does involve premixed fuel and oxygen. Smoke generally, so cool, is less than 1,012 degrees Fahrenheit. So it can be located in void spaces or uninvolved areas. Well, the most common ones I can think of, and they're not common, but is a balloon frame construction house where the smoke has gotten into the attic space through the exterior walls, but its fire attack has been sufficient enough to get the seat of the fire taken care of, but the attic is still full of that volatile smoke. Any questions on objective 8? All right, no. All right, describe the methods through which firefighting operations can influence fire behavior. So firefighters can influence fire behavior? No. Through temperature reduction. Cooling with water is the most common method. Water is used to control burning gases, reduce temperature, and products of combustion. So water has the greatest effect when it's converted to steam. Okay. So you'll see, if you see, a lot of search teams will carry a water can extinguisher, Class A extinguisher with them. If you find a room and contents fire, you can, it's either A, unsurvivable, so they're not going to search it, or they have searched it and they found nothing. They can use that water can and they can put their thumb or finger, gloved finger, over the nozzle and spray some water in there and shut the door and snuff it out. It'll steam itself down. Now, another interesting one is in Europe. A common practice for smaller vehicle fires is they take a tarp, and not a plastic tarp or anything such, and they drape it like you'll learn later in overhaul when you cover furniture. They'll drape it over the vehicle and they'll put a fog nozzle, high pressure, underneath, like on the ground, and turn it on, and it just steams the heck out of it and puts the vehicle fire out. But their helmets are horrible, so they may have some cool tactics. But firefighters can influence fire behavior through fuel removal. So again, part of that fire tetrahedron or triangle, taking that equation out of there. Simplest, allow to burn until all consumed. Well, that's depends on what's burning. May allow fire to burn, minimize groundwater pollution, and other methods. So really, talking about fuel removal, the biggest is just trying to take the fuel out of the equation. Wildland fire is probably the biggest example of this, of removing the fuel. Oxygen exclusion reduces a fire's growth and may extinguish it over time. So these methods will not work if fuel is self-oxidizing. So if you have a fuel that is an oxidizing agent, it's just going to continue to oxidize and create oxygen for itself. Closing doors can limit air supply. Okay? And it says help prevent flashover, as we talked earlier, the closed door policy. Chemical flame inhibition uses agents to interrupt the combustion reaction. So they're effective on gas and liquid fires, like I'm talking about foam. They do not easily extinguish non-flaming fires. Okay. Not practical for smoldering fires. Unplanned ventilation may occur before or after suppression operations start. So when they say unplanned, is either someone opens a door or window on accident, we'll call it, or the fire is already self-vented, meaning it's gone through the roof, into the attic, through the roof, and it's already out, which is the most common. And when it says may occur, it doesn't that may doesn't mean it's okay to occur. It's just that the possibility is there. So can be result wind outside structure, and increase pressure inside the structure. It drives smoke and flames into unburned portions, and upset tactical ventilation. So it throws a wrench into your plans. If you have a tactical ventilation already set in motion and something else gets ventilated, whether it's self vents or someone throws a lawn chair through a window, it's going to mess up your tactical plan, and you're going to have to adapt to it. All right, now Unplanned ventilation, yeah, again, the same. May result of, so occupant action. So again, touching on things, the occupant may have, told their family to get out of the house and they left the front doors wide open. It's just going to happen. We're not going to ask people to, well, okay, once you evacuate your home, to go shut your doors. The fire effects on the building, again, is it self-vented? And then action outside of planned ventilation. You have a law enforcement officer throwing rocks through the back windows. Tactical ventilation is planned, systemic, and coordinated. Okay, so it must be coordinated with suppression operations, as you probably learned with the ventilation course. Influence fire behavior is based on the release rate and can be simple or complex. So increase in combustion rate when controlled. So even coordinated tactical ventilation increases the combustion rate when ventilation is controlled. Okay. So you're adding flow path, you're adding fuel, or fuel to that fire in the form of oxygen. We pretty much know that one. So summary, you need to understand the combustion process, how fire behaves, and how to select appropriate extinguishing agents. Okay? Understanding fire behavior can help you recognize development and how to respond safely and then mitigate hazards present in the environment. All right, any questions on that last? Negative. All right, how about we take a break?
Let's take a break till 7:11, 5 minutes.
7-Eleven.
And then we'll come back with some videos that you guys were sent out earlier in the week, and we can kind of go over those and answer questions, and Josh can do some highlighting of what were in those videos.
All righty. All right, 7-Eleven it is.
Sounds good.
Look at some pictures of some closed doors. See the difference in this room compared to the hallway?
Yeah.
Anybody?
I put the closeddoor.org link, and then there's another picture of a video that shows kind
Awesome.
of the difference. Oh, back up one, Josh, there, the one that said 1,000 degrees, 100 degrees.
Is it this one?
One more. Go down a little bit. It's on the other side of your screen. Keep going. Right there where it says 1,000 degrees and 100 degrees, that's the difference between fire in the hallway versus behind the envelope that is secured by the door for that bedroom.
So obviously this 1,000 degrees not viable, but this bedroom completely viable. Okay.
Like, what would be the changes in like a cat door, like a dog door, or
It wouldn't be as, because remember the heat at the floor is until you reach that flash point is the floor.
So it's still down, but it wouldn't be 1,000%.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. All right. So as we go through this fire behavior and considerations, we'll see a lot of what we touched on the slideshow, and hopefully it'll make a lot more sense.
We have our outline today. Introduction, give you a little brief overview. We'll continue that. Talk briefly about fire behavior and structures. I'll introduce the Governor's Island experiments that were done with FDNY. And then Steve Kerber will get into the fire ground considerations, how you might consider changing tactics or adding tactics to your toolbox. And then we'll wrap up the research and hope that many of you can attend the workshops later today where we can go over this in more detail. Knowledge versus belief. There we go.
I apologize.
And then we'll wrap up the research and hope that many of you can attend the workshops later today where we.
So knowledge, talk about ventilation equals cooling. There's the old thought that we got to ventilate everything to really cool it off for everybody. Exterior fire tack is for defensive strategy only. That's kind of quite a controversial thought out there, that, you know, oh, you're not going in right away, isn't that your job? Well, it is, but we can do a lot from the exterior in a offensive manner, as you'll see. Basement fire attack should be from the top down. Okay, as I've done quite a few basement fires actually, and I absolutely hate being in that chimney of that staircase. So there's looking at different tactics we can do. We don't always have to go in and go down the basement stairs, especially if it's not a walkout basement either. And also the thought that if we do put water in from a window, that we're gonna push fire from that basement up into the next level of the home. Again, like talked about here, exterior fire attack will push fire. I mean, yeah, we can easily, if we want to, we can push fire, but it takes a little bit of effort. But just by putting a hose line into a exterior basement window to cool it, you're not gonna push fire. And then exterior fire attack will hurt victims. Okay, that's not necessarily true. If done properly, it's actually the victim's best chances. So the best way to aid victims is to vent the building and search before suppression. Again, we've learned that that's to be wrong.
We can go over this in more detail. Knowledge versus belief. Over time, the training books, training officers have sort of given the impression in many cases that ventilation equals cooling. Sometimes it does, sometimes
He's just
it
going to
doesn't.
say exactly what I just said,
today,
so you can. Okay, cool.
I don't know why. You normally can't.
That's because I'm awesome.
Must be.
Or them being killed. You know, in past years anyway, this has been a very tough year so far, has been going down. The bad news is, so has the number of fires. Firefighting is typically somewhat of an apprenticeship opportunity, right? You go through an academy, you get a very small amount of fire behavior training, maybe on the order of 3 hours, because the real learning is going to happen in the field, right? It's going to be the experience that you gain from a senior person in the firehouse and going to the fires. That's how you're really going to learn the craft. That's how you're really going to learn how you fight fire. Well, the number of fires are going down, so you're not getting that experience, right? So it's important to look at fire dynamics, to look at some of the research to try to fill in those blanks. Because what we see here in this disturbing trend is the number of firefighters that are dying in traumatic deaths on the fire ground per 100,000 fires is increasing. This is absolutely the wrong way to go.
So on that note, the sad thing is, like, FDNY has seen the greatest amount of line of duty deaths after 9/11. Reason being is a lot of senior officers perished in that tragic event. So what did they do? They had to bring up younger personnel to fill those spots. But the problem is that they didn't have the experience. They didn't have the experience in being on fires, smoke reading, and knowing fire behavior as well.
We want to increase your safety. What are some of the surprises? Well, I'm sure many of you recognize the graph that's under the traditional fire behavior curve. That's been in the training manuals for decades. You have ignition, you have growth, you have a fully developed fire, and then you have decay.
Can you see my cursor on there? Cool.
Well, that's true for basically a fuel-controlled fire. If we have a fire that has enough oxygen to just sustain itself, it will go through that cycle very nicely. So if we have a pile of pallets in the burn building that's pretty leaky, has plenty of air, it's going to do just that. Put a pile of pallets out in the parking lot, it's going to do just that. We have a small fire in this auditorium that doesn't spread very well, it's going to follow that same curve. But if we have a fire in someone's living room or their bedroom, the amount of energy that's going to be released is incredible. And in order to release that energy, it has to consume oxygen. And so these petroleum-based products that we have in our home, polyurethane foams, polyesters, nylons, things like that, is going to consume the oxygen and put that fire into a very early decay stage, because our houses are very well insulated. We have dual pane windows, we wrap our houses in plastic, we have all sorts of insulation on them so that air can't leak in to keep the fire going. When the fire service arrives, in many cases, what they find is smoke. Unfortunately, in many line of duty death investigations that NIOSH conducts, when they talk to the survivors almost say when we got there, all we saw was smoke. They almost say it with a sigh of relief. You know, the fire wasn't so bad when we got there. And I believe that's because they think they're still in the growth stage. They don't realize they're already in the decay stage or the smoldering stage where you have gaseous fuel that's preheated and all it needs is more oxygen. They open the door, they break a window, and in 30 seconds to 2 minutes, there's a very rapid transition in heat release rate, a very rapid increase in temperature.
You see this spike on the graph
has
right
the
here.
firefighters trapped or scrambling, especially if they don't have a hose line in place. So one of the considerations you need to look at is flow path. You do not want to be between where the fire is and where the fire wants to go. So what I'm showing you here is a flow path through a simple apartment configuration where the orange box is the fire room, the bedroom. It's 12 feet by 16 feet. We move down through a 12-foot hallway, and then we go into a 12-foot living room that's 12 feet by 16 feet. And then we enter out into a corridor. And the corridor, if you follow the red arrow, goes to a vent that's the same size as an open doorway, 36 inches by 80 inches. It's 24 feet away from the door to the apartment. If we go the other way, it's the non-flow side. So we're going to look at the impact of ventilating that window, the inlet, and see how that impacts the fire flow and the heat release rate and the conditions throughout that apartment. So the fuel loads that we use are real fuels. These are not training fires, these are research fires. So we're using the fuels that you encounter on a daily basis. We're using the fuels that you have in your home. We want to get a sense for how much energy, or in a sense, how much hazard in terms of heat is produced by each of these fuel loads. So the plastic trash container that we're going to use for ignition, you see is 30 kilowatts. A chair at its peak heat release rate there is about 1.8 megawatts. So if you imagine your favorite chair at home with flames 6 to 8 feet above it, that's about a 2 megawatt fire. We have next the sofa that we were using, 2.5 megawatts at the peak heat release rate. And then a king size bed is about 4 megawatts heat release rate. I should mention at this point that the minimum amount of energy to flash over a typical residential scale room with an open door is 2 megawatts. So basically, one upholstered chair in a room that you're going to fight the fire in has enough potential energy to flash over that room. Now, how many houses do you go to that only have one upholstered chair in any given room? So we're going to look at this burn. Across the top, we see an outer view of our inlet vent. As we move over to the right, we're going to see the bedroom. We see our area of origin. You see the smoke plume going up and impinging on the ceiling. We next have a view in the corridor where we see our ceiling vent. And then we have a thermal imaging camera view that's looking across the open doorway from the apartment into the hallway. If you look at that thermal imaging camera view now, you'll just start to see a little bit of heat flowing out of the apartment doorway into the corridor. As we go across the bottom, we see the living room. It already has a smoke layer in it.
so
We're
far.
2.5 minutes after ignition. That smoke layer is building in the living room. And then the last two images on the bottom is a video image and a thermal imaging camera view of the target room. That doorway opens into the hallway. Right now, if you look at the thermal imaging camera view in the corridor, that should be typical firefighting conditions. Hot gases over your head, cool air that your gear is designed to work with below until that vent is made. And then you see we transition from a hot layer environment, cool environment.
Did you all see that firefighter in the upper left go break out that window? Like right, let's see.
Across the open doorway from the apartment into the hallway.
And that was about 2 minutes in. Go back to.
As we go across the bottom, we see the living room. It
See.
already has a smoke layer in it. We're 2.5 minutes after ignition.
Notice over here the
That smoke
thermal
layer is
imaging.
building in the living room. And then the last two
And then
images on the bottom
watch
is
what
a video
happens
image and
when
a
the
thermal
firefighter
imaging
comes
camera
in
view of the
vents.
target room. That doorway opens into the hallway. Right now, if you look at the thermal imaging camera view in the corridor, that should be typical firefighting conditions. Hot gases
See,
over your
going to
head,
vent.
cool air that your gear is designed to work
Now
with
look.
below until that vent is made. And then you see we transition from a hot layer environment, cool environment in that hallway to heat floor to ceiling, moving at a very high rate of velocity. You'll notice that in the window, we have pulsing in our inlet vent. We have bidirectional flow, hot gases going out the top, and fresh oxygen being entrained inside. And around, you see that we just failed the hollow core door in the target room a little before 6 minutes. So this is what it looks like from an engineering perspective in terms of heat release rate. The heat release rate is moving along, and then you see the vertical line where we vent the window. So the heat release rate's on the order of about 2 megawatts. Once that window was vented and additional oxygen was supplied to this hot, fuel-rich environment, you see that the heat release rate within 60 seconds goes up to 14 to 15 megawatts.
Right here.
Right? What's your hose stream choice for a 2 megawatt fire versus a 15 megawatt fire? If we look at the temperatures in the bedroom,
Big fire, big water.
clearly before the window was broken, the temperatures, basically the higher temperatures are near the ceiling. The lower temperature, the pink down there, is 1 foot above the floor. 1 foot above the floor, we're already at 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Clearly unsurvivable in that room of origin. Notice that when the window is vented, the temperatures increase, and they are pretty much similar floor to ceiling, indicating that we have burning from floor to ceiling, a well-mixed environment, post-flashover environment, which is in excess of 600 degrees C or 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, and that continues that way until we suppress the fire. What about in the living room? Well, the temperatures in the living room, 1 foot above the floor or even 3 feet above the floor, they're on the order of about 300 degrees and down. Is this an environment that a firefighter in fully protective clothing might be in, trying to crawl down the hallway to get toward the fire?
Yeah.
Possibly. You're coming in from a cold environment, your gear's going to protect you for a little while under those conditions until the window's broken. Notice how rapidly the temperatures, again, floor to ceiling, increase, so that now they're in an area that's untenable for a fully protected firefighter to be working in excess of 700 degrees Fahrenheit. If you notice that little spike that happens right around 6 minutes, that spike is from when the door collapsed to the target room and the oxygen that was trapped in that target room flowed out into the hall and burned in the living room. Again, these fuels are very reactive to oxygen. And here's another important thing that people don't consider in many cases. It's a change in the heat transfer rate to the firefighter that's driven by the hot gas velocity. Before the window's broken, that red line shows that we have a velocity of about 8 miles an hour, 1 foot below the ceiling. And the other two lines at 4 feet below the ceiling, or 4 feet above the floor and 1 foot above the floor, you see the velocity is very low. So that's the area where you would be crawling. Once the window's broken, you see that the velocity floor to ceiling increases. And as a result, the heat transfer rate, so not only is the temperature increasing at that location, but because it's a well-mixed hot gas that's moving over you with velocity, just like a hairdryer, if you turn a hairdryer and put it on high speed, it transfers more energy. Same kind of thing in this hallway. More energy would be transferred, reducing your time for a safe escape. The other thing to note is the amount of unburned hydrocarbons. So what are we talking about, unburned hydrocarbons? Well, typically, wood doesn't burn, right? The base material itself doesn't burn. It has to be heated and pyrolyzed, broken down into other fuels to burn. So if we pyrolyze wood, like in your flashover container, what kind of fuels are in there that are going to burn? Well, they're fuels like methane, recognizable fuels like acetylene that are in that hot gas layer, in addition to soot particles and many other components. So what you see here is that even with the window broken, even with all the energy that's being released, even with all that incredible amount of hazard that's there, we still have 12% unburned gaseous hydrocarbon in the hot gas layer in the living room, the red line. What that means is if you were to vent the living room again, open a window, more flame would come out. If you were to make a ceiling vent, more flame would come out, the fire would get bigger. If you can entrain more oxygen, the fire is going to get bigger because you still have an excess of fuel. So the idea that just because the fire is vented in one place does not mean it's safe to enter, and that the heat is always going to go away from you. So what we found, the fuel loads have changed. Synthetic fuels have a tendency to burn faster and generate more unburned hydrocarbons. The building construction has changed. You have the lightweight construction. We have all sorts of insulation. And what we're finding in the research is that even the new dimensional lumber is not the same as the old growth lumber, if you will. And fire behavior is now better understood so that we can get a better feel to pass this information along to you and translate it into tactics. So this decades of research basically all came together last summer with the fire department in New York City on Governor's Island, where we had an opportunity to burn a number of townhouses. And the idea there was to see all these things that have been done at the lab at UL, in the labs at NIST, and in other acquired structures. Could we bring them all together to have a fire department implement them and see how it would work? Sort of look at
Hey, Josh, I think you muted yourself.
exterior fire attack to reduce firefighter exposures to high thermal conditions, and look at how all this would impact the tenability of any victims that were viable. So we have these row homes. Again, they were left in quite good condition, so they were identical. We had a 4-bedroom unit, and if you look at the 4-bedroom unit on the right, there's 2 bedrooms upstairs. And one of those bedrooms, we would keep the door closed, and one of the bedrooms, we'd keep the door open. We'd start the fire downstairs, and we would see how the conditions would impact a victim, if you will, in each bedroom. Again, we're furnishing the houses with real fuels. The first floor, we have a living room area, we have a kitchen area, and an entrance to the basement. Again, real world furnishings, carpeting, furniture, kitchen cabinets, things of that nature for our fuel loads. In the basement, we also did a number of tests in the basement to look at flows up the stairs, look at the best way to attack basement fires. So we had a living room area, and then we also had a bedroom area. And we erected a wall between the bedroom area and the living room area, and we started fires in both. And the idea there being is that if the firefighters introduced a hose stream through that 30-inch window that's right above the sofa in the upper left-hand corner, we knew that hose stream couldn't directly impact the bedroom fire that's in the rear of the basement. So how well would it work? Or conversely, if the firefighters came down the stairs in the rear and introduced a hose stream, how would it impact the basement as a whole? Again, you see that it was unfurnished wood floor assembly, so we had plenty of fuel just in the wood flooring assembly by itself. And there you see an example of some of the furniture, as well as the 30-inch window on the front side of the house and the entry doors, basement doors on the rear of the structure. So they were 2-story townhouses in each case with a full basement, approximately 850 square foot per floor, concrete block walls exterior, and the interior was all wood frame construction with a wood floor assembly. Our fuel load. Again, our fuel was real furniture, polyurethane foam, polyester, and as we looked at some of the tags, just like the tags on the furniture that you have in your house, it says that it's highly flammable. You know, keep cigarettes, keep ignition sources away from it.
Also
So we
can
have
cause
wood,
cancer.
polyurethane, polyester, and fabric. And then the real key that we bring to the table here is having a tremendous amount of instrumentation. So we have instrumentation on the doorway, bidirectional probes. We have them on the windows so that we can tell when the hot gases are flowing out or in and what part of the doorway they're flowing in and what temperature they are. We have thermocouples throughout the structure to measure the gas temperature, to see what the temperatures are in the bedroom, what the temperatures are in the basement, in the living room, all throughout the structure. So we have hundreds of data channels installed. We have thermocouple arrays and heat flux sensors basically located where a firefighter's head would be, about 3 feet above the floor at the top of the stairs and in various locations in the structure, to see what the impact would be on a firefighter that's moving in that area. We have gas analyzers where we're measuring oxygen concentration, CO and CO2 in the bedrooms to look at the viability and the impact that the tactics and the fire are having on any victims that might be trapped in the bedroom. We bring it all together, and last but not least, of course, is a series of videos. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve Kerber, and he'll show you some of our results.
Thanks, Dan. So as you can see, with that amount of instrumentation, we're getting hundreds of hours of video from every different view in the structure. We're getting millions and millions of data points. So what do we do with all that? Well, we work with firefighters of all levels, of all different types of departments from across the country, many of which are your members. And we try and boil it down to, what does that mean to the street level firefighter? What does this mean to tactics? What can we learn here and how can we apply it? And so we're going to go through some of the common tactics that you might use on the fire ground. The first one is event enter isolate search operation. Here, adding the I to VEIS, emphasizing the isolation of that room that you're entering to understand the importance of cutting it off from the flow path. And what you're looking at here is a fire in the first floor living room. And as Dan mentioned, we have one open bedroom and one closed bedroom on the second floor. We're going to have the tower ladder go ahead and take the open bedroom, and you'll see that you don't get much flow out of that open bedroom. They reposition over to the bedroom with the open door. So it's now in the flow path, and you're going to see a very different result.
I think he misspoke.
You're going to see a hot gases flowing from a high pressure to.
So I think he misspoke on that. This room right here has the closed door, and you see he had no change. This room had the open door into the hallway or the common area.
To a low pressure, which is that window that got vented. And the thing that we have here is we have a cable running through the firewall from unit to unit attached to the doorknob, and you're going to see that we're going to be able to pull the door to that room closed, simulating a fire crew isolating that room, and you're going to see how conditions change. So figure they're making entry at this point, they're getting to that door, and you're going to see once that becomes isolated, the smoke in that room lifts.
Notice how the fire
becomes
behavior on the
searchable,
ground
gain
floor,
visibility, and more importantly,
how it
you
changed
stop
when they
the impact of
broke that
cool
window
air in
too.
low, hot gases out high. So we can boil that down into this simple figure right here. We're looking at the change in flows and the change in temperatures throughout the structure. And you can see that as you have that flow path through the open bedroom, temperatures increase dramatically. You've got, once that window's taken, you've got temperatures in the floor of the bedroom increase from 170 to 250. You get a 15-mile-per-hour flow through that window. Ceiling temperatures increase from 350 to 650, creating a environment that is not survivable for very long.
So if someone's up here and you break this window inlet over here, you can see the temperature difference of what you just did. You brought this bottom of the stairs here on the main floor from 800 degrees to 1800, and then possibly where someone is taking refuge, you've brought them from 120 to 160 just by doing so.
And now we look at the impact of closing the door. You see that the flow goes from at the moment right before the door was closed to the moment right after the door is closed. You go from a 12-mile-an-hour flow to no flow. You've got ceiling temperatures that drop from 450 to 150, and temperatures at the floor that go from 170 to 120. So clearly, you're greatly improving the environment in that room simply by closing the door. Now we want to look at the impact of water through an open front door onto the living room fire. So you've got a living room fire with the front door open. Front door being the source of air is going to increase the size of the fire in the living room. And what we're trying to show here is the concept of not putting water on smoke is very dangerous these
To
days.
temperature of the closed
If you wait
bedroom,
until you
95
see
degrees,
fire, until you
open,
open up your hose line. In a
145, is
situation
that
like
what I'm reading?
this, you're crawling under into the flow path, and you're putting yourself between where the fire is and where the fire wants to go. And here we're showing that you can gain the upper hand in that structure fire by starting your fire attack prior to moving through that front door using the reach of your hose string. And especially the folks that use smoothbore or commonly use straight streams, when you've got a reach of 50 plus feet, you got to take advantage of that. And to be right on top of the fire to begin to affect the fire is not the best solution, because you may never see fire, but those hot gases over your head in excess of 1,000 degrees can go ahead and actually light up behind you because they're moving to where they're finding the source of air to burn. If it's too fuel rich in front of
High
you,
pressure to low pressure.
you may see nothing but black, and ultimately the folks outside would see it light up at the doorway because that's where the fire triangle is taking place. Here's what it looks like. So we're looking at just over 20 seconds of water, and applied as they moved up the steps into the structure. And you're looking at living room temperatures on the back of the house dropping from on the order of 600 down to 350, really controlling the environment. Bottom of the steps decreased from 1,800 degrees to 800 degrees with that small amount of water. Again, gaining the upper hand, taking the energy out of the fire to go ahead and move into that fire and completely suppress it. Another, as Dan mentioned, the importance of basement fires. Positioning yourself above where the fire is and the hazards associated with that. Here we're flowing 180 gallons a minute into the top of that stairway, protecting the stairs. We've got a basement fire below that, as you can see in the left view there, is well involved. And we're looking at what's going on and the ability to, let's say, protect the search that may be taking place above the basement fire. We go ahead and flow water for a period of time, and then we shut it down. And you're looking at those hot gases flow up those basement stairs. And we're going to go ahead and now look at the conditions that occur in that structure as we're protecting the stairs. So you can see nothing happens to the basement. So that water is not going down the basement stairs, making a turn, making another turn, and landing on what's actually burning. You're basically just trying to cool the gases as they come up the chimney, flowing from the high pressure in the basement to the low pressure, which is the open front door that you came in through. And you can see that the top of the stairs cool off from about 600 degrees to 400 degrees. So still very hot at the top of those stairs. You're only going to be able to take that for a period of time. Looking at the bedrooms on the second floor as you're trying to improve conditions for victims. It only decreases from 225 to 210 in the open bedroom. So you're not having a huge impact up there. And of course, the basement is continuing to burn. Another thing we saw here, which was concerning because we saw it multiple times, was the path of fire travel from the basement to the first floor in all of the experiments we did was never through the interior stairwell. Hot gases came up through the interior stairwell. However, the fire spread was through the pipe chases in the kitchen, into the kitchen cabinets, and it ultimately flashed over the kitchen and collapsed the kitchen floor. So if you can get tunnel vision and think that I need to put all my resources to protect in the top of those stairs, you can quickly get caught off guard as that fire is moving up in the structure and possibly even behind you through penetrations in the floor. That was really important in this case because the path from the front door to put yourself in a position to protect the stairs would place that kitchen and that collapse zone pretty much your egress path as well as your path inward. So you can put yourself in a very dangerous position. Getting above a fire burning uncontrollably provides both the collapse hazard as well as the flow path hazard that you're putting yourself in the chimney, as Dan described. So we can look at alternatives. Show up to a structural disc where you've got fire showing from the A side, well-involved basement. What we're looking at is the conditions on the front of the structure, the flow path established through the front door.
Right now, the top of the stairs
now we're going to go ahead and flow, in this case, a smooth bore flowing 180 gallons a minute into that basement window. And we're watching the thermal imaging view at the top of the stairs and looking for that push of heat that's thought to occur.
Nope, didn't happen.
And what we saw was that the knocking down of the source of the fire, taking the energy out of the fire, actually didn't allow for a huge burst of heat to come up through that basement stairway. So the thought of pushing the fire up from the basement to the first floor or further endangering crews in several scenarios, applying water in the window, applying water in the walkout on the back, we didn't see it.
So looking at this is majority of things that we find are like within feet of an egress. So if they have a basement fire and someone possibly collapsed in this area of the front entrance or even in the kitchen here at the top of the stairs, they may have passed out, but they're still viable at 140 to 150 degrees.
So here's what those temperatures look like. Remember previously when we were protecting the stairs, we cooled the top of the stairs from 600 to 400. In this case, they quickly cooled from 600 to 200. Taking the heat out of the basement, went from 1200 degrees to 400 degrees in the basement. So you totally take away the source of the problem. And then you can see upstairs in the bedrooms, cooled from 225 to 190. Was more effective than the hose line flowing at the top of the stairs. And ultimately, you create a condition in the basement where if there was a collapse hazard, you're falling into, it's going to be a hot environment, but it's a hot, wet environment, and it's not a well-involved fire that you may potentially be falling into. Well, if it works in the basement, what about giving the fire a quick hit in the second floor window prior to moving in? Possibly being a seamless operation as you're walking up, you give it 10 seconds of water as you're moving in, and then you go in and finish it off. We're looking at the conditions that occur downstream. And one of the things you'll see here, which we found out, is if you rapidly move a smoothbore nozzle around, you can create a fog pattern. And if it's your intent to have the hot gases that are flowing out of that second floor to continue to flow out of that second floor, it's important that you slowly move that stream so you don't break it up and entrain a whole bunch of air. So even though this stream was applied not optimally, we still got fairly good results. So we're looking at taking a bedroom fire in excess of 1,000 degrees down to 200 degrees at the ceiling. And really where we were focused was in the hallway right outside that bedroom.
Most likely we're going to have
push a huge amount of heat that if there was a victim laying in that hallway, that we would place them in further danger. And what we saw
went up a little bit.
The ceiling temperatures dropped from 900 to 200. And at the floor, if someone was laying on the floor, there was a modest increase of 100 degrees to 120 degrees. But if you look at taking the amount of energy that they'd be subjected to from that hot upper gas layer, clearly the benefit of cooling that off is tremendous.
So just by applying 20 to 40 seconds of water, even though they did create some disruption in the thermal layering by doing their TZO type pattern with that straight stream, still someone in this hallway, in this bedroom, or any one of these is still going to be viable if they've gone down on the floor.
We also wanted to look at vertical ventilation. We wanted to look at a fire on the first floor living room that you can see in the top right view there.
All you vertical vent guys.
Open front door, so the fire is moving towards the source of oxygen in the front door, and we're going to go ahead and open up a roughly 4x4 hole at the top of the stairwell. The thought being, you vertically ventilate, it lifts the smoke off the first floor and it cools things down. And you can see that once that vent was opened, more air is able to be drawn through that front door, increasing the size of that living room fire and actually flashing it over, pulling it towards the front of the structure and making very bad conditions upstairs. Then we went ahead and we closed the front door to take away the air inlet, just allow the vent to be an outlet. And we'll show you what that did to conditions. But again, it's the traditional, if I can open up high, venting equals cooling and things are going to get a lot better.
Nope.
Well, the caveat there is if you have a ventilation limited fire, not necessarily. Water gets applied from the front, and you can see that it actually knocks down the fire completely in the rear of the structure by taking the burning gases away. Essentially transitioning it from a ventilation limited fire to a fuel limited fire. So here's what that looks like. Looking at the impact door control. So if we have a vertical vent made and we control the front door, limit the fresh air going in, the bottom of the stairs slightly increase because we took away that fresh source of air. However, the top of the stairs drops by hundreds of degrees. The living room went from 1700 to 1200, 1300 to 750. So by choking that fire, slows it down, allows your vertical vent to work a little more, and ultimately, once the water goes on the fire and you gain the upper hand, which means you're letting more out than that fire can create, things get better very quickly. So it's all about timing. It's not that vertical ventilation always makes things worse, absolutely not. But if you time it and coordinate it with your suppression, it's going to make things better very quickly. Here's what happens when you apply that water. So you apply that water from the front door, 25 seconds of water, and you can see the living room temperatures plummet from 1500 to 250, and ultimately the top of those stairs from 1200 to 400 in 22 seconds. So you're allowing that vertical vent to do what you intend
Do the
to
closed
do,
bedroom 1500
not
to
just
100
allowing
degrees.
fresh air in.
That's
Take the heart of the fire away, and your vertical vent will work for
Even
you
the
very
open
well.
bedroom.
Look at the open bedroom drop 1500 degrees to 100 degrees in 20 seconds when you allow that vent to do what it's meant to do. So we've thrown a lot at you. I want to wrap it up real quick and talk about the key points. And so all the experiments were consistent with what we've seen in previous research. At this point, we're in the hundreds of full-scale fires that we've seen the same themes over and over.
Any questions or comments on any of that? Does that help make a lot more sense, correlation with ventilation that you just went through and fire behavior? I'm getting a nod yes over here on this side. Anybody else?
Yeah, that makes
Nothing?
sense.
It's some pretty heavy data that they were able to accomplish. And just to give you the background, this happened in 2013, and it was revolutionary to just gather that much data, much less make some changes and some suggestions in our tactics and what really happens inside a building. But that data gave us that information that we never ever had before, and it will influence the fire service for decades to come, and really shows the capability when you put science to our profession and use it to make ourselves safer and more effective at our jobs, especially when it comes to fire.
All right.
Switch to the other video, Josh.
Yep. Let me. Come on. Did I just lose internet? Maybe.
No, you're still there.
Okay, cool. So the next is dollhouse vent prop. We actually have 2 of these that we are building. So when we're able to get all back together, we'll be able to actually do this ourselves, and y'all be able to manipulate the fire behavior and do some venting to experiment and come up with ideas of what ifs. What if we do this? What if we open this? What if we close this? So although the video is pretty cool, but actually doing it is better, and we will be doing that here in the near future, hopefully.
We're going to go ahead and get started. What we're doing today is we have a major house that talks about flow path, and also will demonstrate backdraft. This design is not my design. This design came from some fantastic instructors from around the country. What they'll do is they'll send the plans, and then they'll
What happened?
Is it freezing up on your side, Josh?
I'm gonna try to reload it. They are one-time use. You can. I've seen people build them, use the plans and build them out of steel and welded.
So what we did, plans, firefighter all, Lieutenant Byrne, and targets, they the house for me.
All right. Technical difficulties. Yeah, and I don't know if it's here. That's worrying. This is connected. Okay. So we. All right, let me
Now I know what kind of videos you've been watching.
Right? What is that? All those giant model jets are awesome, and they're like $50,000.
Especially when they crash.
Yeah, could you imagine if such crash?
Oh, dude. My internet's really slow. Are you sitting there streaming stuff?
No.
No.
Josh, do you want to just go over the highlights from the Dow House, and then they can watch it offline, and we can answer any questions and call it a night? Hey, Josh, can you hear me?
Hold on. Whatever.
You're not sharing the screen anymore. Do you want to just go over the highlights of the Dow House video? They can watch it offline, and then we can
Whatever
answer any
counts as things
questions.
coming through barely as well. Yeah. So really with the highlights with the dollhouses, they kind of do the same thing as the video we just watched. But they only have one room that is the burn room, but has an access door to the right bedroom on the first floor, and there's an access door that can be opened and closed from the first floor to the second floor, and then also from the second floor into the attic, and the attic out the roof. So really you can see all the manipulations you can do with opening and closing all those doors. So again, it's a pretty interesting, neat video to watch, but even more so to actually do in person. And again, hope